Hello everybody, Miles Kessler here, and welcome to the Integral Dojo Blogs Dharma Discussion Series. And today I'm with my old friend and mate, Mark Walsh, and it's great to have you with us, Mark. This is a Dharma discussion, and Dharma, it's a pretty general word, but it's an old Sanskrit word. It means teaching, it means universal principles, and it means absolute reality, ultimate reality, I should say. But really where the universal principle is kind of where the rubber meets the road. And that's what I always love about Mark and his work with embodiment and coaching and all the stuff he's doing in the world, because he always finds what's relevant by seeking what's the first principle there in the work. And then how does that principle bump up against the evolving, crazy relative world that we live in? And Mark is great in those two areas. So I'm quite excited to have Mark with us today. Hey Mark, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm in a little hotel in the countryside in England. I'm staying at a Sistema teacher's dojo. So it's like a Russian martial arts thing. Doing that for a few days. I've been breaking my balls trying to get this book finished and the final edit. And my health started to go downhill. So I said, you know what? I want to practice what I teach. I'm going to go do healthy stuff for a few days. So I'm basically here punching my friends, rolling around on the floor, doing crazy breathing exercises, and a few interviews in the meantime for the book.
That's great. Well, let's give a quick shout out to Matt Hill, who's the Sistema teacher. Matt and I used to live and train together in Iwama, Japan, and Aikido. So I have to send him my greetings.
He's a real gentleman, and I like the practice because it's really orientating around character growth, and I think he embodies that. And for me, as a martial art, it gives me a lot that I'm interested in right now. This is the basis of my work, embodiment, and how we can develop ourselves through working with the body. Rather than just doing exercise or trying to be tough guys or trying to show off with yoga poses or whatever, but how can we really develop ourselves? And I think Matt is one of those people that really embodies that, and that's what's really interesting to me these days.
That's beautiful. And for those who don't know Mark, other than the fact that he likes to get to what's relevant, he's basically his background, his field is embodiment, and I think Mark has had a bigger impact on bringing the not just the term, but the field and the practice of embodiment to the mainstream. I think he's had a bigger impact on bringing it to the mainstream than pretty much anybody else I know out there. There's a lot of embodiment teachers. Mark's really kind of taken that word and taken that field and practice and brought it into the mainstream. And he's doing it again with a new book, which is really what we're going to talk about today. So you want to tell us a little bit about your book, Mark?
Yeah, sure. Where to start? So, my life's work is bringing the embodiment field together and also into the mainstream. So I've taught NGOs in war zones. I've taught in business quite a lot. I've taught a lot of coaches. I've taught a lot of yogis, and also had all the pieces fit together. This world of embodiment, people might be asking, what the hell is that, right? So a subjective approach to the body, a depth approach to the body, a way of exploring being through the body. And there's all different elements to that. So I was just talking martial arts, but then there's also the yoga part. Mindfulness is the basic foundation there. Then there's the body therapy, the somatic arts. There's a whole improv. There's a whole bunch of different areas, and bringing them all together, seeing what are those core principles underneath that, and then bringing it to an audience that I think, well, people need it. For me, we live in this slightly numb, disembodied world where people are not feeling themselves, and as a result there's really serious consequences to that, both for health but also for relationships, for prejudice, peace. There's a whole bunch of areas this hits socially for sure. Yeah, and you see that there in Israel. I need to tell you about this. So for me it's important work, and it's important to get out there, and I wanted to write a book that was a beginner's guide, and in this book it's totally accessible. But the really interesting thing is the format the book took, and I've only just worked out why, is that embodiment by definition is not an academic subject. It's an experience, the experience of the body. That's what it's all about. So to write about that could be like dancing about architecture. And the solution I came up with was to have a book that was a quarter theory. So really crystal clear, non-hippy-dippy theory. A quarter like instructions, like quick win tools. Here's something you can do walking down the street in Tel Aviv, sitting in an office in Berlin, wherever. And then a quarter like my life story to illustrate it with a deeply personal kind of story arc. And there's also kind of poems in there, which like looks at the I think to understand the body, we can't just dissect it technically. It has to be looked at in terms of our biography, in terms of poetics, definitely in terms of practice. So the book has those 4 elements to it.
Wait, what was the four? So there's the theory, the practice, your life story,
and poetry. So
oh, yeah.
it actually interested me because I'm really ADHD, and I've been wanting to write a book for years and never could sit down and do it. And then what happened was one of my colleagues started saving my best social media posts and blogs. And she's like, look, these are the popular ones. These are the ones that people responded to. And she sort of threw them all back at me and said, look, you've got 3/4 of a book there. That wasn't entirely true. I had to kind of, whip it into shape quite considerably and add things to make it. Yeah, like I wasn't 3/4 done, but it gave me the bare bones of a book. And what it's meant is it's a book that I think of it as a book you could read on the toilet. Like most people I know are pretty busy today, and they don't have time to sort of sit down for 2 hours and read. This is why podcasts and things like this are popular. But if it's in digestible little chunks, they can read a little cool, inspiring poem and then read a little technical thing that's going to help them at work, and then get a few tools they can use with their kids. Just like these little bite-sized chunks that are accessible and fun and colorful. I think I do color and accessibility quite well. So that's the heart of it.
The title is Embodiment Beyond Mindfulness.
Moving beyond mindfulness is kind of a clever playing words.
Yeah, right. Yeah, which is beautiful, because mindfulness in a way brought together all these disciplines under the title of mindfulness, because mindfulness is a universal principle. And that's what's so solid about embodiment as well. Everybody has a body. It's a universal principle. It's a universal experience. And you did this beautiful, I would say more so in the podcast than perhaps in this book, but you do this beautiful way of connecting every field of practice where people are using the body, and you bring it into the universal principles of things.
I lay that out in the book. So I say, what we're confronted with in the embodiment world today is just too much choice. Do I go do Aikido with Miles Kessler? Do I go do yoga with his wife? Do I go do fire rhythms? Do I do contact dance? So we need something that brings that together.
Relative, yeah.
So we go, okay, what do I really want to work on? What's a good fit? What's the focus range of this? And I have a whole lot of really nice visuals in the book, and people can see them online. Actually, they're freely available on the book website, where we break it.
Let's say that I want to give me an example. Sure. I get you, but just for the might not be. Give me an example. Let's say I want to work on something.
So that's the first place to start. This is interesting because most people don't start there. So most people say, I want to do Aikido because I like Miles, and Miles does Aikido. Yeah. And that's valid. There's some validity in that. But a more interesting place to start, more useful place to start, is often to say, okay, what's the quality that I want to build in myself? And now, for example,
could that be an aspiration, something I'm aspiring towards, or could it be something that I don't want to deal with now? That I got too much stress in my life, so I want to overcome that.
Well, I think there's 2 ways to look at this. One is skills acquisition, one is qualities. So skills acquisition might just be, I want to learn to regulate myself better. I want to learn to relax under pressure. Aikido is a good fit for that. Yoga is a good fit for that. I'm going to work in an Aikido dojo or a yoga studio that's intense enough I can sequentially learn relaxation skills under pressure. Like system is great for that too. Other arts don't really have sequential pressure gradients applied to them where you can skillfully learn that. And a lot of them don't have what I'd call bridging practices, ways to transfer that learning off the mat, out the dojo. So that's another piece there. So there's the skills model, and not all arts build all skills. So for example, some of them are relational, some of them aren't. What's the big difference between most yoga and Aikido is it's not relational, right? That's not to say yoga is better than Aikido, but it does mean there's a different opportunity for learning.
Right,
but Aikido is non-linguistic. So you're going to learn things in improv comedy you can't learn in Aikido. Sure. Or I did a lot of Aikido for years, and then it's like the aesthetic and the sexual wasn't really explored through that. Right. And then I went to tango, and it's like, oh, this is central now, musicality and aesthetics and sexuality.
And it's tourniqueted, Aikido in a way, it's tourniqueted by its cultural form, the Japanese form.
Well, this is another point.
Beautiful, but it really is also a tourniquet in some ways.
Well, we could look at, I've lived in 6 countries. I've worked in about 50. And the cultural factors are huge. Like our biggest course, Embodied Facilitator course, runs in Russia as well as England. And it's a different course. It has to be. You know, I have students from Saudi Arabia and Japan training with me this year. You know, it's in London, it's everyone anyway. So it's those cultural factors, you know, whether it's cultural trauma like we experience in Israel, you know, whether it's relationship to authority, whether it's, you know, you talked about form, and then we have this nice dance with embodied practices of form and freedom. So some are more form-based and some are more free-flowing. And again, not to say good or bad, but to say good or bad for certain things.
Back to the qualities. So if I want to work on specific qualities, then you would say, okay, these are the, if we would first try to figure out what the qualities that I'm aspiring towards.
Exactly. So I have an Australian student I just had lunch with. I just did a one-to-one with him, and he's like a real easygoing, kind of chilled out Aussie guy. And I'm saying to him, like, hey, maybe Sistema's not the right place for you, because Sistema's really relaxed and flowing and chilled out. And maybe he'd be better off served by like a, you know, a more formal Japanese art. And then, you know, and this is where it gets a little devilish. It's not as simple as that, because it's also embodiment. One definition of embodiment is how you are. So how you do the art is as important, if not more, as the art. So you can go to Aikido and be very rigid, but you could equally go to Aikido and really focus on flow and flexibility. Or you could go to Aikido and focus on pleasure. Like I get a lot of pleasure from Aikido now. Now, that's possible within Aikido, but maybe the form isn't so well designed for that. You know, it's not designed for pleasure primarily. So,
as opposed to something like ecstatic dance or something.
Yeah, like most ecstatic dances, you know, altered states and pleasurable experiences are quite a big part of it. And now, you know, let's say you do ecstatic dance in Italy with a group of hedonist friends. I mean, now you're really designing a practice, right? So it's who you do it with is really important. Like, you know, my Aikido club might be really respectful and well-boundaried, and that's a really good thing for me to learn implicitly through the body. Like I spent a month in Israel once, and I learned, in inverted commas, to move much quicker and in a more angular way. I didn't try to, but I just picked up that movement pattern from being in Israel for a month, you know? And even talking to you, I kind of feel a little bit of like this speed, or, you know, and that's just something I pick up. Sometimes I'm talking to you on the phone and there's all this background noise and it's Tel Aviv and there's chaos.
All the time.
Hamas rockets and traumatized people and just busy city life. And, you know, I look out, I'm in the English countryside now. It's got a very different vibe. So where you do it is as important as who you do it with and how you do it. So now, you know, this is just one piece of the book, by the way. There's one piece of the book, which is the what, the where, the who, the how. And it goes through each of these. This is just one page of the book.
That's
so these
cool.
are the sort of
because there is the embodiment, but there's also the what do you say, the surrounding culture and society and context that we are embedded in.
Yes, and physicality. So the actual physical place, you know, the integral quadrants, right? So the physical place, the cultural place, you know, the mentality you're doing it with. So these are all, and then the traditions that might come with a particular art. So this is just one consideration. And then, you know, when I work with students on courses, there's also just practical stuff, like you're more likely to go to the yoga studio near your house, right? And then we get to really interesting questions about, do you choose the thing you love that you're going to do loads of? Or do you do the thing that's kind of an arranged marriage, you know, that you could fall in love with? Or do you do that thing that's really hard and is going to build the thing that is going to be you most need? But maybe, you know, maybe if you just had divorce and your dad just died, you don't want to be doing something that challenging. Maybe you should be doing the easy thing, right?
Well,
rather than.
Well, that's a common question with teaching or with coaching. Do you coach somebody to max out their strengths, so where they're already strong, and just max that out and go with that, and that's going to be your gift to the world? Or do you have them in a more integral way? Do you say, okay, these are the areas your weaknesses, you need to give a little bit of attention to these areas?
Yeah, and I would depend who I'm working with. So if I'm someone new to embodiment, I might say, just do anything, start anywhere. It all ends up in the same place anyway. Are you drawn to Aikido? Are you drawn to yoga? It's all good, baby. Just whatever. If someone's under-resourced, I do the same thing. Like I have students who are really going through some shit in their life. I say, you know what? Forget about that thing we're working on. Just whatever's going to resource you right now, because you just had a baby. Life's hard enough. You know, just do what helps you get you through the day. So that's the when of the practice, we could say, the when in someone's life. It also depends if they're a professional embodiment teacher. So for the average person, just doing yoga or Aikido, one thing is enough. But for people like us who are professionals, that's going to make you provincial. that's going to make you strongly biased towards a certain perspective. That's not really good enough for people like us. Even if you were just teaching Aikido, you should at least know that it's not everything. Like, you're not like a super Aikido fanboy who thinks that Aikido is the ultimate martial art and the ultimate personal growth art. And it's funny, certain people do get quite upset when I start mapping this, because they say,
Well,
well,
actually, to be fair, I used to be.
Oh, you used to be the fanboy, and that's the stage, right?
Yeah, and I ran into the limitations there, and I realized, hang on, there's more,
Right.
and I've got to move out of these boundaries to, absolutely, yeah.
So most of my students are sort of mature people they've got good at one thing, they've realized its limitations, as you say, and they go, what else is there? Maybe we send the Aikido teacher salsa dancing, or we send the salsa dancer to karate or whatever. And there's definitely a dance with this. We have a course called the Embodied Facilitator course, and every year, every student gets given a practice. And the first 3 months, they just try different things and get coaching and get advice. And then they commit to something for 6 months. And even if they never do it again, that maybe they're a yoga teacher who's learned kickboxing. This is a real example. I'm thinking of a Dutch yoga teacher. And now she's got like a different side to her. And it's not that she's going to be going around kicking people in the head, but her teaching has got a more yang side, a more fiery side. Right. Sometimes we use the 4 elements to give a bit of a simple map for this. Yeah. And she was very watery, very Dutch, very yogi. And now she's able to be a bit more kick-ass. And she doesn't even do the kickboxing anymore, but she's kept that somatic capacity for her life, that's the important thing, right, Miles? Right? Who gives a shit if you can do a wrist lock or a hip throw or a handstand or any of these? These are just vehicles. And my conversation's always been, often people say this is a do, this is a way to develop a character. But if we really took that seriously, knowing everything we know in the West about psychology, then how would we do this? And what would we do? How would we do it? Who would we do it? All the things we just said. Which is what John Vervaeke calls developing an ecology of practices. He's been influential for me. We were sort of intuitively getting there. And then he's a contemporary of Jordan Peterson, who's in the same psychology department in Toronto. It's psychology of practice is his thing.
You just had him on the podcast. So
yeah, smart guy.
Great discussion. Really good.
I'm in this really cool position where I have all these awesome people on speed dial. So when I have meditation problems, I phone you up and say, Miles, am I going crazy? And then I phone up Shinzen Yang for a second opinion, or if I want to do martial arts, I get to, call Matt Hill or whatever, So it's because of the podcast and the conference, which was super big last year, I've been in this great position of, it's like a 21st century, like Esalen in the 60s, like seeing all these things come together. And I'm lucky enough to have the resources and the opportunities to travel and train with different people face to face. And that's really a great position to be in, to have mapped this territory. You can't become expert in everything, but you can taste everything and become expert in a couple of things. That's the thing.
You can say that because you're deep in one area, and at least one thing.
Two. You should be deep in 2 things.
Oh, so I'm just talking about you. So you're deep in 2 things. And that gives you the capacity to actually speak with authority in something that you're not as deep in. But you speak with authority in a way that doesn't take authority of that position. But actually, you're still humble in front of whatever the other thing is, dancing or whatever. But you can still have a discussion with a high level Taekwondo teacher, but coming from a place.
Yeah, there's a nice podcast where Paul Linden, who's an Aikido teacher, one of my mentors, meets Shinzen Yang, who's
it's amazing, yeah.
And they have this meeting, and they've never met before, and it's great because they're both deep enough in their own practices to see the parallel with the other, and they have this shared kind of cultural heritage around Judaism. And I just stood back and watched that one. I was like, wow, this is if you go deep enough in one thing, it does lead to other things, but then. And I think one of the traps of the postmodern world is to just be shallow, right? Is to just constantly flit around between things, or to just have a mess that isn't structured in a way that makes sense. So this has been my life's work.
I mean, it's like the old metaphor. That's something that Upandita used to, my meditation teacher, Upandita used to, is that when you're digging a whale, you have to stay in one place long enough to reach the source.
Yeah.
You're going and jumping around, digging, you end up with nothing but a bunch of holes in the ground. But if you reach the source, and you can actually access that source, because the source is infinitely resourceable, so you can actually tap into that. Now that takes it's kind of coming back to the marketplace type of practice, but it is another practice, and it is something that can be achieved if you reach some level of maybe expertise lightly, but some level of depth in your giving.
I almost see three levels. So there's the level of tasting something. So
Right.
like I'm doing that with Systema now. It's like a few days of practice. It's like, okay, I could at least recommend this to a student and tell them what it's potentially good for. And there's
Especially if
another,
you see a student who's lacking missing some qualities that you know
exactly.
that, yeah.
It's like, because I've tasted it rather than just read about it in a book, I can have a pretty good sense of what's a good match for that student. And I might bring Matt in as a guest teacher, and I know how to bring him in as a guest teacher. We have a lot of guest teachers on our courses because I get what he could offer. And then the next level I see is like a year long. So if you like, I danced tango for a year, a couple of nights a week for a year, I can now dance tango. Like this is, you know, there's a certain degree of skill there. And after a year of most things, your skill level your learning curve changes. It starts to slow down. And then you have a choice. It's like either you get married or you split up, right? And for me, it was like, okay, I'm not going to keep investing. This is kind of late at night. It destabilizes you a bit emotionally. I'm not going to keep working on this, but I'm really glad I did that year. It's a bit more than a taste. I did a year of MMA. I did a year of tango. I'm doing a year of Feldenkrais this year. And that's the next level. I think that if you're an embodiment professional, it can be really helpful, not just to have tasted things, but also to have a little bit of skill in a few areas. And then, as I said, a couple of areas to develop real expertise over a lifelong practice. So a couple of wives, a couple of husbands, not just one, because I feel like it gives you another reference point, having two, to stop you falling into some of those traps of the cultural heritage or whatever.
You were talking about 3 skills or 3 levels. You were talking about
so that the taste, the year-long level where you get kind of some skill in something, you taste it and then decide whether you kind of want to get married or split up. And then the expertise level where you're really on that lifelong practice. A minimum criteria for trainers that I work with the Embodied Facilitator course on is to have 2 lifelong practices, 2 real areas of expertise. Yeah, so the third level for me would be like a lifelong practice that you start to see different angles through. You go through periods of disillusionment, boredom, and all this kind of thing. You know, you're way past the honeymoon. There's one piece of the book, right, outlined like 8 stages you can go through in any practice, like honeymoon stages and this kind of thing, you know, plateaus. George Leonard talks about that. Strozzi talks about that. You know, it's a common theme. If you do enough practices, you start to see the patterns. And then the lifelong one, I think for trainers that I work with, I ask they have 2 of those so that they have a reference point and they're not too caught in that particular culture or that particular way of doing things.
But you said that people, when people come to work with you, they usually already have one.
Yeah, most students, but teachers, I require to have 2 that I work with as teachers. So, for example, Alexandra Vygotsky in Russia, she's a body therapist and a tango teacher. Or Rachel Blackman, I work with in England, she's an expert body worker and an actress. So she's got like a couple of perspectives on things. And no one person can master all these things in a lifetime. Like it's impossible. Like there's a few people that have come close, like I don't know, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen or someone. But it's you know, I figure that I can become qualified in embodiment by the time I die. Like, for example, I've just embarked on a 4-year Feldenkrais training. Now, let's say I do some serious practice of that. Feldenkrais becomes a major practice for me. You know, that's going to be a 10-year journey. So working with people on Embodied Facilitator course, for example, the teachers have 2 main practices. And the reason is that we want them to have different perspectives on embodiment, not be caught in the traps of any one system.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's funny you said it because I have 2 in my like 2 deep path, 2 lineages that I've kind of been through. But then I also have probably half a dozen other things that I've either dabbled in or I consider like an ongoing practice for me. But I don't consider myself a master by any, or highly skilled by any, by any sense of the word.
And I guess we're going to look at, again, it comes back to this question of like, why are we doing yoga? Why are we doing Aikido? You know, like, and as long as people are getting the benefits in their lives, that's the thing that matters to me, that they're actually building the skills that are useful for their lives. Now, if they're embodiment professionals, it's slightly different.
Well, let's look at, so before we finish off, I do want to hear about the podcast and also the Embodiment Conference, but tell me something about the title, Embodiment Moving Beyond Mindfulness. Why did you choose that title? And
well, it's partly just because it's snappy and provocative and a bit fun, and you know, people like that. But it's also, I think, the modern mindfulness movement has got a has become a little, what would be the word, clinical, or it lacks juice. I think modern mindfulness has lost an ethical component, lots of depth component. And for me, movement adds something. So mindfulness in its, if you start going back to the sort of Sanskrit and the Pali, I talked to Martin Aylward, a meditation teacher, about this. It actually comes a lot closer to what I'd call embodiment. But there does seem to be this difference in the modern perspective. There's a lot of people who are interpreting mindfulness as simply being aware of something. So being aware of
that is the classic definition. It's dualistic. There's the mind, and there's the object that they are mindful of. So there's already and that's a skill. Detaching and observing is a skill.
Sure.
But it also has if you're not careful, it's detaching and attaching.
Yes, I definitely see people who fall into the trap of, not this. I'm mindful of my body. There's a bit of a sort of spiritual bypass there.
Right. Yeah.
And then actually, and rather than actually going into it, getting close to it, experiencing that is part of yourself, even if it's just your ordinary everyday self. I'm not a meditation teacher, so I'm no expert there, but I definitely see trends in kind of modern secular mindfulness. I think something is lacking. And often we describe embodiment as awareness and choice. So changing your state and developing your being. So if we look at 2 time frames, so aware of what's conscious, but also aware of pattern, and you won't get that through meditation because it's invisible. It's like aware of your tendencies, not the things that are just arising right now, like emotions. And then the other, and then definitely that choice piece is less stressed. So it's, okay, how do I actually want to be right now? Actually making a choice to change the state shift. And not through hours of meditation or going on retreat, but through like right now, something you can do when your kids are screaming, like the centering techniques, for example. Now, there's a degree of that in meditation, like metta techniques, cultivating positive qualities, but often not like quick enough wins for the modern world. Needs to be things you can use like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's, I found 2 things. I found, the work that I do with the body and Aikido. And then kind of emotional shadow work. Those 2 things have given me an emotional agility in relating with situations and people like nothing else, like nothing I ever got into meditation. Meditation gave me that emptiness, the peacefulness, the quietude, and the place to really kind of find solitude and retreat. But anything can happen and it doesn't matter. But to be able to be with, and like a tango master, an aikido master, to be with situations when the kids are crying and whatever is it's something I got much more through shadow work and aikido practice, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think a relational practice is really necessary, and some people do like these, circling, authentic relating, like some kind of relational mindfulness. So I think it's still pretty rare, actually, but I think that's a step in a healthy direction. Sometimes I give like in the book, there's a little exercise called coffee shop practice, where every time you buy a coffee, you just kind of feel your body, look at the person, relate to them as a human being rather than as a coffee delivery object, So there's little practices in the book like that to help with things like that. And as you say, shadow work's another major piece. It's stuff I've had breakthroughs through therapy, and I would probably add trauma work, which isn't so much in the sort of integral model, which I think this is a big piece of the book.
It's lumped in with shadow in a way.
Yeah, I think it's slightly different. And I get why you could put it in that category, but for me, that's been profound. And part of what the book is a healing arc of trauma. The first personal stories in it go to sort of difficult things in my childhood and working in areas of conflict, and then it's the path of really healing through trauma. And for me, that's definitely an ongoing thing that makes a big difference to my own intimacy with my wife, to my own facilitation, not getting triggered by students, whatever it is, and just really getting rid of a little bit of a defensiveness and the ability to be well with other people. I think that's pretty important. So there's quite a chunk of the book on that.
I mean, and I know that you're pretty skillful. Some people might not think so, but you're pretty skillful on social media. And what's interesting there is how much micro trauma, not to talk about microaggressions, but really we inflict so much shit on each other in a disembodied way when we're not face to face. When we're just it's so quick and it's so easy, and there doesn't seem to be an ethical way to approach, how we are on social media.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think it's great, because the traditions didn't train us how to use social media. Now they might have some principles that can help, but this, like for example, there's no reason you can't use Facebook to do a metta practice.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to visualize people. You can just Google them, right? You can just type in their name and their picture comes up. You don't even have to use your imagination, right? So there's absolutely no reason, but that's not part of our traditions. And technology is potentially very disembodying. I mean, how often have you been doing emails, even as an embodiment teacher, just gone, where have I been the last hour? Like I haven't felt my body once. And then maybe I'm like uncomfortable, or I'm desperate for the toilet, or, my ass aches from sitting for too long. And suddenly my body is like screaming at me, because I haven't been listening to the whispers and screaming, which is what the body does on several levels. I think in this disembodied world, we do lose our ethics. And this is Paul Linden's great insight. The ethics is embodied. The felt, like, I don't want to be mean to you because it would feel bad, and my body would have a sort of reaction to do that. I naturally empathize when I see you. If I can touch you, even more so. But on social media, when it's just a little picture, we can't see or hear them. We're not feeling our own body. I mean, the potential for disembodied lack of empathy is really quite huge. I mean, there's other factors in the world that disembodied, like trauma and speed, and there's various factors. Just being on the London Underground and everyone's rushing and busy, that's disembodying. But it's the trauma in Israel is numbing and disembodying, Russia. So there's many factors, but the internet's a sort of a new challenge. And there's a nice piece in the book about how to stay embodied online. It's a little 10 bullet points of things you can do. Some of them are really practical, like drink lots of water, so you have to keep getting up to go. So it's things like setting reminders. It's things like drinking lots of water, so you have to keep getting up to go to the toilet. There's things like there's a bunch on there. Actually having practices where you do online mindfulness practices. So let's say you log on every day, and the first thing you do is Facebook. Well, why not make the first minute a embodied Facebook meditation? Now most people can't manage more than a minute, but you could, if you can do a minute, you're building a muscle. So there's things like that you can do.
Yeah, as my office is here in the dojo. So 3-4 times a day, I step up from the computer and I clean the dojo, which is, it's a great thing. The dojo's usually already clean, but I'll get, and that's, if I don't do that, I'm trashed at the end of the day. I'm completely like, I no matter what, even doing Aikido or going on playing with the kids, I'm just completely wasted. But if I don't find that balance, the quality of my day goes like down.
Yeah, no, totally get that. I think it's a big one for a lot of people. And, I like to give like little lists of things that people can do. So there's like, 10 things parents can do, written by a colleague of mine who's a parent. And then there's like 10 resilience tips. These are things I used to teach NGO workers. And then there's, what else is there? There's leadership tips. And then there's a bunch of stuff for coaches, how to bring the body into coaching, for example. So as well as the basic theory, the more personal illustrations, there's a bunch of kind of applications, as it were.
Well, I think what's the coolest thing about embodiment, Mark, is something that you said before, is that it's juicy. It's just things get real on a very kind of energetic level, and in a different way that if you and I start to talk about what's relevant, maybe we have an issue between us and we're finally able to open it up. But when we just open it up to our bodies, it's like what's going on in the body comes to the surface right away.
I think it's a shortcut to intimacy and relating. It's a shortcut to wisdom, to like, what my values, what matters to me, what do I actually feel really matters to me. It's a shortcut to humor, and also it's just a pragmatic shortcut. Like if I don't know, like last 2 years ago, I was giving my dad's eulogy, right? And I want to do a good job, and my sister's a mess, and I'm like, okay, I'll do it, and I step up, and I've got like 2 seconds to get my shit together before it starts to feel weird, And I'm pretty upset. And I'm in the church that I kind of knew when I was a kid, and I was all these memories and things going on. I haven't got time to call my therapist. I haven't got time to don't go do some sun salutations. But what I can do is feel my feet on the ground, bend my knees, relax my belly, breathe out, and then do the fucking eulogy, right? Like that's when we need this stuff. You know what I mean? We need it now. We don't need it. Excuse me while I go do 10 sun salutations.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful, Mark. Well, listen, before we finish off, I'd like to hear, first I want to ask you about your podcast. We haven't mentioned it yet. And then maybe you want to say something about the conference that you're going to be, that you're this small, little, stupid, silly little kind of corner of the internet conference.
The conference will actually be the biggest thing on the internet. We think it may literally be the biggest thing there's ever been on the internet. It will be the biggest educational event on the internet. So we've got 1,000 speakers coming together next October, so a year from now.
That's insane.
And yeah, I'm borrowing a huge amount of money to make this happen, which is terrifying.
And what is Zoom going to be able to accommodate that?
Zoom, we have a speed dial to Zoom. We've been talking to Zoom, so we have special technology in place with Zoom. We're hoping to get translation into 7 languages, which is super cool, but it will certainly be, it's running 24 hours a day, and there's going to be 10 different channels. So there'll be like a yoga channel, a martial arts channel, a trauma channel, a coaching channel, and 1,000 speakers from all different countries around the world. There's going to be these major headliners that people will know, like Ken Wilber and Stephen Porges and Wim Hof, and various kind of famous, super big names in the field, all the big names basically. It's free to all, so it's 10 days long, free to everyone, and hopefully I make my £250,000 loans back on recordings. But in any event, people can turn up to the whole thing and enjoy it. Last time we did it, 15,000 people turned up, so we just decided to make it at least 10 times as big. And really what we want is for the 20s to be the embodiment decade. So we want to kickstart the 20s being like the 60s, a decade of change, a decade of human potential moving forwards. So this conference itself it's really a kickstart of a whole big movement. I don't know. I kind of feel like go big or go home at this point in the world, right? I don't want to get macho about it, but it's like, what are we doing?
The fact is, the technology is there.
It's there. It's there for the taking.
At our fingertips. It's there for the taking. Exactly. So good on you, man. Good luck.
Thank you. Yeah. People go to theembodimentconference.com. They should find it. If they Google it, I think because we only just launched a new website, they might find last year's website, but you can always click through, and you can register now. We won't spam you, and there's a Facebook group if you want to be part of the conversation. We're going to have an official speakers application. I tend to get spammed by people wanting to be speakers, so there's going to be an official, except for the really big names that we've already got. We're going to have an official process next year, and it's going to be fair and done officially, rather than just sort of people mailing me trying to hassle me into it. So yeah, the conference, take a look at that, and then the podcast is basically, again, my life's work to get embodiment to everyone in the world. And not everyone can afford a book. Definitely not everyone can afford one of my courses, like the Embodied Facilitator course. But the podcast is free. Yeah. And we've done over 200 episodes.
And mostly interviews.
So it's, they're 90% interviews with the world's most interesting people. And you've had one of them. You were like number 7 or something, back in the day. We should get you back on, actually. So it's, I've interviewed everyone. I made Ken Wilber cry. It's like we've interviewed all sorts of people. So
here's my question for you.
Whatever you're interested in.
The podcast's doing great. Here's my question: over 200 interviews, or 200 sessions, and all these interviews. What's the biggest thing you've learned from the podcast? Biggest insights?
Well, there's a personal. Yes, there's personal skills I'm working on, like being a better listener, which was never my strength. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch in different areas. Like one of them is actually who's having a real conversation and who's just doing some marketing spiel, who is actually connected. I have a much stronger felt sense of that now. And who's
and what do you do? So if you feel somebody just playing old tapes or doing their normal shtick.
I rudely interrupt them, or I make a rude joke. And sometimes, one time I just said, listen, I'm bored of how you're speaking. Can you actually be more real? Like,
did you say that?
Like, yeah.
I won't ask who, but maybe you can give us a hint with the episode. No.
Listeners can find it in there, but that was recorded. I don't edit them. So sometimes I'll gently hint towards that, and occasionally someone just can't get out of that mode. And 1 in 10 is a bit boring, but 9 out of 10 are fascinating. And I'm curious. Like we just had this guy Joseph Bart's on, and he's like running like a farm outside of Berlin, and he does like movement stuff. And I want to go live with Joseph for a week now, you know, or Matt Hill's on talking about Systema, or, you know, you're on talking about all your cool stuff. And it's like, I don't know, I just feel really lucky that I think we live in the best time in human history, and definitely the best time as a sort of person. It's just awesome. Like the technology, the access to travel, the fact that I can talk to my mate in Israel, and the opportunities for learning within that, I think, are not to be squandered. And podcasts work well because everyone's so busy. You know, I can listen to 2 hours of podcasts in a day. I'm not going to read a book for 2 hours. So, you know, like,
absolutely. I get most of my learning these days through the podcasts.
Yeah. And it's, you know, and the numbers are crazy too. Like, we've got 14 million views on the YouTube channel. The podcast gets several thousand views every day. Now, if we sell 1,000 books on book launch day, I'll be happy. You know, it's a pretty decent opening day for a book, 1,000 copies, right? You know, even with my lists and all the connections and social media and all the rest of it. But, you know, just the numbers of people that are going to the conference or the podcast, you know, I think it's actually really phenomenal. And I think that does provide a new opportunity. You know me, I'm no big socialist, but I do think that access to this stuff is really important. And what we learned at the conference, we learned there were people that couldn't even come to a workshop if it was free because they had to look after an elderly parent, or you know, I have a lover who's a single mother and she makes contact aunt once a month when she gets babysitting. You know, like, that's hard for her to get to a class, you know, but she's listening to my podcast every day, you know? So it's like she's at least getting some inspiration, some education, even if she's not able to do everything. And people, when we do online trainings, people thank me. They say, thank you so much. You know, I look after my elderly dad. I can't get to Brighton. You know, like, this is most of the world. This isn't just a few people. So for me, it's really important. And, you know, we do, you know, I'm Robin Hood, you know, we do corporate stuff. And I take £3,000 a day from, you know, some German bank. It's no problem. So it all works out in the end.
Well, definitely, I definitely recommend, for those who haven't subscribed to the Embodiment podcast, do so. It's a great resource, and there's like 200 past episodes and lots more to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, just cherry pick. Like, there's like 20 on trauma, so you could just cherry pick that, or yoga or whatever, you know. Can I give a resource for the book, just to kind of hint to where that is? As we need to wrap up.
Before you do, I got one question. Yeah, one question about the book. Why should people get the book?
Because the consequences of disembodiment are atrocious for yourself, your loved ones, and the world. And while this book isn't the solution, it will guide you to solutions much more skillfully than blundering around playing pool in the dark.
Beautiful. Sounds great.
That's off the top of my head. It's pretty good, that, eh? I quite like that. I've learned from you Americans. I've got some good marketing spiel going down now, you know.
Where can we find the book, Mark?
If you go to The Embodiment Book, I know it's fucking creative, isn't it? theembodimentbook.com. You'll see the first chapter's free. People can download that now.
Awesome. Nice.
It's going to be available on Amazon from the 27th of November. So this is probably coming out around now. So on the 27th of November, you can get everything I have on the internet for free if you buy the book. So I'm doing a ridiculous launch offer. We have several £100s worth of online products, like recordings of the conference and different online trainings. If you buy the book and send me a Facebook message or an email saying, I have bought your book, then I will send you a code, and that code will give you access to all we normally sell absolutely free of charge. It's for one day. Basically, it's a ridiculous offer because we want to spike the Amazon sales to get to the top of the bestseller list for the category for one day. So I'm basically, you buy a £13 book, which is like $15 US, and you can have about £500 worth of free embodiment material. So it's
awesome.
Like genuinely a very good offer.
Well, look, I'm gonna post. I'll post those links below this video. If you're looking at my blog somewhere, just check below for the embodimentbook.com. You can also just do that yourself. The link to Amazon I'll post here. We have an Amazon affiliate, so full disclosure. So if you do that, you also support Mark. You also support our work. And beautiful.
Last question.
Awesome.
Last question. Who shouldn't buy the book? This is a better question. Who shouldn't buy the book? Someone asked me that.
So let me ask you. So who shouldn't buy the book, Mark?
People who want to stay the same. People who can't learn. People who are easily offended. People who don't have a sense of humor. People who think that their thing is the best thing and the only thing, kind of fundamentalists. I won't say anyone in California because that's going to cut out at least 20% of my audience. But you know who you are, and everybody else will get the jokes and get something from it. So Miles, thank you for. I hope this has had value to people. It isn't just a plug. So it's been a pleasure, man.
Well, I appreciate it, Mark. Looking forward to our next conversation. Even looking forward to seeing you in person again, hopefully someday soon.
I'm in Israel in November. I'm doing some stuff in Israel in November for Embodied Yoga Principles. So, because fuck England in November, let's be honest. So I'm going to be swimming in the sea in November in Israel. So I'll see you then.
We will meet then.
I need to go right now. Thanks for your time, Miles.
Yeah, all the best.
Bye-bye.